Have you ever convinced yourself you could forgive the one thing that shattered your heart? My name is Erica, and I'm 33 years old. I thought I had built a pretty solid life with Thomas. We'd been together 8 years. We had a little house on a quiet street in Illinois, 2 rescue dogs, and plans to start a family soon. I used to look at him and feel safe, like no matter what happened out in the world, he'd be the person standing beside me. But all it took was one phone call to tear that comfort away. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Thomas's co-worker called me by accident. She thought she was leaving a voicemail for someone named Natalie, but instead, she left it on my phone. I'll never forget her words. "Hey, I covered for you and told Erica you were working late. Hope your weekend with Natalie went well." My heart pounded so hard I had to sit down on the kitchen floor. For a few minutes, I just listened to that message over and over, part of me hoping I'd misunderstood. But I knew. Deep down, I already knew something had been off. When Thomas came home, I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I just held up my phone and played the voicemail. He went pale and started stammering excuses, how it didn't mean anything, how he never planned to leave me, how it was just one mistake. I wanted to hate him right then. But instead, I just felt hollow, like someone had scooped out everything inside me. That night, I sat awake until dawn. I thought about every birthday, every holiday, every little moment we'd shared. Was it all a lie? In the end, I told him I needed time to think. Part of me still believed love could fix this. We started therapy the next week. Thomas was eager to prove he'd changed. He cancelled trips, turned off notifications, and promised he'd never lie again. I could see the guilt in his eyes. He'd cry sometimes, and it almost made me feel sorry for him, which was confusing. How could the same person who crushed my heart now be sitting there looking like a scared kid? Our therapist, Grace, was patient and kind. She asked us to talk about why the affair happened, and Thomas admitted he'd been feeling like something was missing in his life. It stung hearing that, like I wasn't enough. But Grace reminded me that his choices were never my fault. That part was hard to believe. For a while, we settled into this routine of cautious hope. We'd have good days, even laugh over dinner, and for a moment I'd pretend we were just us again. But then the memory of that voicemail would sneak up like a splinter under my skin, and the trust I was trying to rebuild would crack all over again. Sometimes, late at night, I'd watch Thomas sleeping on the couch. He insisted on staying there until I was ready to share a bed again. And feel so many emotions I couldn't name them all. Grief, resentment, loneliness, love, rage, even a bit of pity. It was like my heart couldn't decide which direction to go. But I kept trying, because part of me still wanted to believe that love could survive anything if you fought hard enough. After a few months, I truly wanted to believe we were on the mend. Some days, it even felt like we were stronger, like we'd survived the worst. But then the little things started adding up. First, it was a receipt from a boutique hotel tucked into Thomas's jacket pocket. I remember standing in the laundry room, turning that slip of paper over in my shaking hands. He'd told me he was staying late at work again, catching up on a project. I swallowed my suspicion. Maybe it was for a work conference. I tried to believe it because believing was easier than facing another heartbreak. Then I found the second clue, an unfamiliar necklace glinting between the seats of his car. A delicate silver chain with a tiny pearl. Not my style, not mine at all. My stomach dropped so fast I thought I might faint. One night I confronted him gently. I told myself to stay calm, to give him a chance to explain. He looked me straight in the eye and said it belonged to a co-worker who must have dropped it. His voice sounded almost too practiced. That was the moment something in me cracked. The trust I'd been gluing together with so much effort splintered again. And still, I held on. Because I didn't want to be the woman who walked away twice. I'd already told everyone I was staying that forgiveness was possible. I felt embarrassed to admit I was probably being fooled again. So I kept my doubts to myself. But deep down, the fear grew. I started noticing how often Thomas checked his phone. how quickly he'd silence calls when I entered the room. All those emotions, hope, dread, denial, sadness, twisted into a tight knot in my chest. After weeks of quiet suspicion, I knew I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. The fear was eating me alive. One Friday evening, when Thomas said he had to work late again, something in me snapped. I waited until he left, my hands trembling as I pulled on my coat. I didn't even have a plan. I just knew I needed the truth. I drove to the boutique hotel, listed on the receipt. My heart hammered so hard I could feel it in my throat. Part of me still hoped I'd find nothing. Maybe I'd catch him alone reading emails. Maybe I'd be proven wrong and we could finally heal for real. But when I reached the parking lot, I saw his car. And a moment later, I watched him step out of the lobby with a woman I didn't recognize. She looked about my age with long auburn hair and a nervous smile. They didn't see me at first. I watched him kiss her cheek, the same affectionate way he used to kiss mine. I felt everything: rage, heartbreak, betrayal, even shame. Tears blurred my eyes, but I forced myself to stay hidden until they went inside. I snapped a picture with my phone, hands shaking. Proof. My mind reeled. I drove home in silence. When Thomas returned later, I was waiting at the kitchen table with the photo. For a second, he looked startled, then defeated. He didn't even try to deny it this time. He confessed everything, that he'd never really ended the affair, that he'd lied every time I asked. His voice was flat, like he'd practiced this speech in his head 100 times. I felt hollow. The person I'd shared 8 years with was now a stranger. The morning after Thomas's confession, I woke up feeling numb. It was as if my body was still here, but my heart had gone somewhere else to hide. He tried to talk. He begged me to forgive him again, said he'd finally end it for good. But this time, his words sounded empty, like a song I'd heard too many times to believe. I thought about all the moments I'd doubted myself, all the times I'd stayed silent to keep the peace, the hours in therapy, the tears in my car, the nights I'd lain awake wondering what was wrong with me. And I realized I wasn't the broken one. I had just trusted someone who didn't deserve it. There was sadness in that realization, but also relief. For the first time in years, I felt something close to clarity. I told Thomas I was done. My voice shook, but I didn't waver. I packed a small bag and went to stay with my sister Lydia. When she opened her door and hugged me, I finally cried. All the grief, the rage, the disappointment, it poured out in heaving sobs. Lydia didn't say much. She just held me, and in her arms I felt a sliver of safety again. Over the next few weeks, I filed for separation. The paperwork felt surreal, but also empowering. Each signature was a step away from the pain. Sometimes, I'd think about the early days of my marriage, how hopeful we'd been, how sure I was that we'd last forever. Those memories still stung, but they didn't control me anymore. I learned that loving someone doesn't mean losing yourself. After the separation was official, I expected to feel nothing but relief. But the truth was more complicated. Some mornings I still woke up and reached for Thomas out of habit. I'd catch myself wondering where he was, who he was with. Even though I'd made the right choice, it didn't erase 8 years of memories. Grief has a funny way of mixing with freedom. One day I'd feel empowered, like I could conquer anything. The next, I'd feel hollow again. But little by little, I started to heal. I went back to the things I'd set aside to keep our marriage afloat: painting, yoga, meeting my friends for coffee without worrying about getting home in time to make dinner. Lydia encouraged me to reclaim my life, piece by piece. One evening, I decided to finally box up our wedding photos. As I slid each picture into storage, I whispered a quiet goodbye. Not just to Thomas, but to the version of myself who thought love meant tolerating lies. It hurt, but it was also freeing. I started therapy again, this time focused on rediscovering who I was without him. My counselor, a kind woman named Brenda, helped me see that forgiving Thomas didn't mean taking him back. Forgiveness was for me, to let go of bitterness and make space for something healthier. Months passed. The pain softened into acceptance. I began to trust myself again, to believe I could build a life that felt true. One afternoon, sitting on my porch with Lydia watching the sunset, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I was grateful, because surviving this had shown me my own strength. Sometimes losing someone you thought you couldn't live without teaches you that you are far stronger than you ever knew. Thanks for listening.